from the Tualatin Valley Community Television Studios in beautiful green and wet and Haley, Beaverton, Oregon. We're bringing you the Conversations with Dr. Don show. Good morning and good evening, and I'm following my script because I'm nervous because David Delk here is my guest, and we're going to do a switch on you in a few minutes. Why don't you take over, because I'm going to show some slides as we're talking and as you're interviewing me. So you want to start with?
Good. So let's start with the basics, which is who you are. Tell us who you are. Like, let's start with where you were born and how old you are, things like that.
Well, I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, on December 26, 1928, and I lived in the Ninth Ward. And that picture you're seeing is where my house was. And I'm not sure which house that is. And the one next to it that you can see a bit of, that may have been the house I was born in. But that was way back a long, long time ago. And that lady with me is my oldest brother's daughter, Jackie. And this was taken about 4 years ago when I was down in New Orleans. And I said, take me back to where I was born in my first few years of life. And she took me back there, and I was really surprised to see that there was nothing to see anymore. So here is another view of that house. Yeah.
And this is the house that you think you were born in?
Not that house, but in that particular block, and that's as close as I could come. I think my house disappeared, and this one replaced it, I'm guessing.
Oh, okay.
But I have many memories of that time. And up the street a few blocks was Johnson Lockett School, where I went to kindergarten. And just thinking about it brings back all kinds of memories.
Okay.
And then we moved up to Annette Street in the 7th Ward, which was a step up economically. And this house is quite interesting because this is 2022 Annette Street. And this is the only house in the block that's still standing. Now, the block disappeared, fell apart, or deteriorated before Katrina. This was before Katrina. And I was really surprised when I pulled into the street and I saw the house, and that's my old house. Because I went to elementary school from there and went to junior high even from there before my mother died. But then the interesting thing about this is I went up to the front door of this house, knocked on the door, and the lady you see there came to the door and saw me, and she says, "Hello, Donald." And I thought, "Do you know me?" And she says, "Well, yes, I remember you. I used to live across the street." And this was in the 40s, and this lady remembered me. Can you imagine
that's
that?
very, And did you remember her? Did you know who she was?
No, I had no idea who she was, but she knew who I was.
How interesting.
And all kinds of memories come back from those times. So moving on.
Okay. So why don't you tell us about your rather large family?
Yeah, I had 11 brothers and sisters. There were 12 of us.
Wow.
And I was the baby of 12. And there is my oldest sister, Wilna, who is in a home in Los Angeles. She's 96 years old, and she was the one who took over the mothering duties after I was born, because I was a 12th child and Mama was all worn out. So I remember Wilna getting me all ready for kindergarten and getting me all slicked up. And Miss Brown was my kindergarten teacher, and Wilna used to tease me because I couldn't say Miss Brown, I always said Miss Brown. And she's going to see this, and she'll remember me. And then now here's a picture of more family members. There's me between Ruby and Pearl, 2 sisters, and they're both dead now. And both of them died in the past 5 years or so. And next to Ruby is Donna, my baby daughter. And next to Donna is Sandra, Pearl's daughter. So, yeah. And then there's a picture coming up of Junior. And this is what we opened the show with. And I wanted to open the show with this picture of Junior because he's a year older than I am. And he was more like a brother than my blood brothers were. And we were really, really close. And he was very, very special. And he matured physically early, and I was a late mature physically. So whenever there was any difficulty going on among our peers, Junior stepped in because he was a muscle guy, you know.
It's nice to have a protector.
Yeah. And he's beautiful, and he's going to see this. And he's in a home in New Orleans now, and he's been in the hospital and back in home again. And like I said, he's a year older than I am.
Yeah. So
special feelings for Junior.
Did all your brothers and sisters get along pretty well, or there was a pretty big widespread? So maybe the oldest ones weren't even home when you were born or when you were little.
It depends on who you ask. Under certain conditions or certain questions, they were a solid family. Because Papa ruled the roost with an iron hand. He was an old-fashioned Catholic dad. And Mama was, I think she was born with a rosary and a prayer book in her hand. She was a strict Catholic. But then they had their feuds back and forth as big families want to have, you know. But I remember they all had a lot of kids, all of them, and there was always a bunch of nephews and nieces around, and there's a whole house full of kids. And the house on D'Argenois Street, I forgot to mention, we didn't have any electricity, and we had no running water inside, and it was very, very primitive. But we were happy.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't want to distract you from your program,
Sure, go
but
ahead.
just tell me about so how did you get water? Who got the water?
There was a faucet in the middle of the backyard, and I don't know how the water got in there. There was a pipe coming in, and we went out there to get water to bring it in the house to use on a wood stove. And we had a number 8 wash tub where we took a bath once a week. And me being the youngest one, in the wintertime, I was the last one to get into that gumbo and soup. Because the water was getting cold, and it's not funny, Rick. But those are fond memories. Yeah. And then we got a picture of, there's Mama. Yeah, she died in the early 40s. And like I said before, everybody loved Mama.
And how old do you think, or how old was she when she died?
I think she was about 55.
Pretty young.
She was pretty young. And she had a stroke. And she had a lot of sicknesses before that. And from the time I knew her, she always had something going on. And she had severe allergies and food sensitivities. We didn't know about that then. So she was constantly trying to eat and keep her digestion going, but we learned a lot since then. Incidentally, I've inherited that tendency. I've got food sensitivities too. Yeah, but and then Papa was sort of the strict disciplinarian, and all the girls were very wary of Papa because he was watching who they were dating or seeing, and he had to approve, even if they want to say hello to some guy.
But he didn't do that with the boys?
And no, it was kind of a different culture in those days. Boys are pretty free in the Creole culture to go out and have a good time, and the girls had to be pretty prim and proper and strict and toe the line to be presentable for the suitors who would come around and woo them, or something like that. So there's Mama, and we got an ancient picture of Papa, and I think this was taken in 1930 or 31. And it's the only picture I could find of him. It was torn, as you can see. We tried to repair it, but that's the old man. And his friends called him Elise, but it was Ulysses Baham. And I remember him. He was a shipwright. And him and my mother were born in Madisonville, Louisiana, where the reunion is going to be in July. and they moved to New Orleans during the Depression when it was starting, because things were pretty bad and they weren't building any ships anymore. They couldn't get any work. So we moved in the Ninth Ward, and this was a temporary move until Papa got some carpentry work or some shipwright work in New Orleans, and it never happened before he died there. But so much for wonderful Papa. Now, what else you got for me?
Well, let's talk about Louisiana Creoles. What kind of give us a definition of what that means in terms of race and in terms of ethnicity?
Easy for you to say. Huh?
Oh, I think that's a good.
I thought you'd never ask. Definition of Louisiana Creoles. I wrote this in 2009 because I got some material from the people who were staging the reunion in Madisonville. And there was a definition of Louisiana Creoles that was okay, but it didn't quite suit my fancy, because I was, among other things, a technical writer. So I wrote my own version, and indeed they published it in their material thereafter. So I'd like to read it for your benefit so you can see what I see a Louisiana Creole is. Louisiana Creoles are people of varying mixtures of red, white, and black racial heritage, and are largely descended from the colonial white, that is European, slave black, African, and indigenous red, Native American races from the time before the Louisiana Territory became a possession of the United States through the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Unlike many other ethnic groups in the U.S. who are immigrants from other countries, Louisiana Creoles are a mixed race group that originated in Louisiana, USA, and are descended from American-born forebears. Having originated in Louisiana, some Louisiana Creoles have moved to other larger American cities and to a greater or lesser degree formed pockets of Louisiana-originated Creole groups and culture. Louisiana Creoles have over time developed a unique culture and language derived mostly from the French with minor contribution from other languages. This patois evolved in the 19th century and at that time was used by slaves and planters alike, and continues to be used today in some older Louisiana Creole groups. This Louisiana Creole unique culture also has a distinct relationship with food, nutrition, and ritual around food preparation and consumption. Louisiana Creole cuisine incorporates spices, ingredients, and condiments from the French, Italian, Spanish, African, and Native American cultures. The Louisiana Creole community is purely American in its diversity of interest and involvement in political, social, and other interests vital to our freedoms and way of life. Louisiana Creoles come in all physical presentations, including eye color, skin pigmentation, and hair grade. Probably the most significant characteristic of Louisiana Creoles, in addition to physical presentation, is a mindset that manifests itself in a quiet appreciation of their unique racial heritage and culture. That's what Louisiana Creoles are, according to me.
All right. Well, very good. All right. Well, that certainly gives me a better idea. Can you tell us, not for your family, but for our audience, the difference between Creole and Cajun?
Yeah, Cajun are people who moved on from Canada some years ago, and they're considered white, whereas Creoles are a racial mixture, but there was a time not too long ago when there were white Creoles. And there are some Creoles in earlier generations, not too far back, that became white, because in the Creole society, the idea was to marry somebody who was lighter than you, so that and the children then may get light enough to become white and not have to carry the burden. So I know of the European white ancestors that I've had, but I don't have any record of the black African or the American Red ancestry.
Hmm.
But I do know my mother's dad was from a little town near Hamburg, Germany. But that's a little of the interest of how Creoles came about and the difference between Creoles and Cajuns nowadays.
Oh, okay. That's
But I understand
interesting.
nowadays that they're sort of intermixing even more and doing Zydeco and all that stuff together.
Yeah, right.
And in that sense, the racial difference is, well, since the 60s and the Civil Rights Movement. But I got to go down there again and learn some more about it.
All right. Well, let's you talked about your mother and your father being Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you're Catholic.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Tell us a little bit about
I'm recovering.
that. No, I know. My partner is Catholic. And one of the things he really detests is to hear that phrase, recovering Catholics. You're in trouble now.
I'm sorry, Tom. I'm sorry. Well, I moved away from the religion as time went by, and I found that there were things that I was required to do, and the ground rules changed depending on the the opinions of the Pope and the Catholic hierarchy and leadership. And eating meat on Friday was that changed, and then this divorce thing was a problem. Because I was unhappy in my first marriage, and I contributed at least half of the difficulty in that marriage. But we were Catholic and we couldn't get a divorce. So we stayed together longer than we should have, even though we had the 5 beautiful children. And as time went by, I found that the things that Catholicism was teaching didn't fit with my objective view of the reality of what life is about and what's important. It seems to me that I can live a life that's worthwhile for me and other human beings by following the simple golden rule. And I'm going to jump ahead, end my shows with KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Being kind, being friendly, and being charitable. So I found that trying to live according to the Catholic doctrine and committing a sin from time to time because I didn't live up to it, and I was constantly feeling guilty. And that's a wonderful Catholic trait that we carry a lot, feeling guilty.
Yes. I know my partner certainly carries it.
Tom, he's talking about you again. Yeah. So, and I got a picture of Corpus Christi here. Mm-hmm. That's where I took my first communion and used to go to Mass every Sunday and pray a lot and was on my knees a lot and pounding my breast and doing mea culpas and like that. And there's still some fond memories and some interesting ones that I won't go into now with the nuns and how they like to discipline you with a rule on the back of your hands.
That certainly sounds like a fond memory.
And incidentally, I was scheduled to go to seminary and become a priest because I was an altar boy for many, many years. And then discovered that I didn't really have a calling and it'd be too difficult to live even more strictly according to the Catholic doctrine, to become a priest. And I think I was going in that direction because it was a sort of a reaction to my mother passing, and I was a mama's boy. I was a 12th child, and Mama called me baby oftentimes when I was a young teener before she passed, and I get mad at her, but I was her baby. And to lose her, it was very traumatic for me, perhaps more so than the average death of a mother.
How old were you then?
I was early teens.
Early teens.
Yeah. So I embraced the church more fiercely. But at the last minute, I says, no, I can't be a priest. I'm too sinful.
Okay, great. So tell us a little bit about your early childhood, or your younger, excuse me, not your childhood, your adulthood, younger adulthood.
Younger adulthood. Yeah. Well, I got some pictures about that too. That this was in 1950 when I just come out of the military, and this was in Los Angeles, and with my best buddy at that time, Richard Randolph. I used to call him Stalebread, that was his nickname, and he called me headquarters, and we hung out a lot together and went to LA City College for a while, and we played around and had a good time. And so Richard, yeah. And we have another one of me, in later years, you notice that hairdo and the pants, and this is, I wanted to be a hippie.
Oh, yeah.
That was in my sister Wilna's backyard. And we have one more of me to show you my evolution through the years. And that's a few years later on. And yeah.
Yeah, very handsome. Very handsome.
You're
As
kind.
you still are.
Ah.
Very good. Okay. So tell us about your education, because I know you're pretty highly educated. It comes through.
Yeah. Did I tell you about my health?
No.
Okay.
I wanted to hear about your education.
Okay.
I'm throwing you a curve.
Education, that's interesting. It seems so much of my life I took what I wanted to learn. I don't know how I learned very early on. If I wanted to do something or be something, I would do it and take it whatever it took. I don't know where that came from. Being a poor Creole kid in New Orleans in the Ninth Ward at that time, I didn't have much self-esteem at all. And it seems like everywhere I turned at home, my sisters were all pretending to be mama. And this one had an order, and the next one had an order, and I was just tired of being, I was depressed. I was a depressed kid. So my childhood was not too happy. And I remember in elementary school, I had a tonsillectomy and an appendectomy. I was a skinny kid. And I vaguely remember finishing elementary school. The next thing I knew, I was in junior high at Albert Wicker High. And that was in a complex where there were 3 buildings in this square block, and all of them were condemned, except 2 of the buildings had part of the first floor that was still usable. Well, this is black and white education.
Wow.
And talking about that, in elementary school, we had school books, but they weren't available for all the students, and they were handed down from the white schools, and they oftentimes marked up. It was just horrible. So we were Creole in our culture, this group, but then we went to black schools. So I had the full impact of being colored or Negro at that time. So then in junior high at Albert Wicker, then they closed the school, and I went to Booker T. Washington, which is like a trade school. And I think I went there for maybe 3 months, and then I ditched the rest of the time and played hooky and didn't finish high school. And then when I went into the Army, I took the AGCT, the testing, and I found out that I had a brain. I never thought I could think. And my IQ was one that would qualify me to go to West Point with a senatorial appointment, and not even just OCS. What is this? So I went into the Army, and eventually I went to school at night and changed majors a bunch of different times, and finally ended up doing a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in psychology and a PhD in clinical psychology, which I got to when I was 30 years or so ago in San Diego, USIU, and got my PhD in clinical psychology. And I was really pleasantly surprised. It looks like it's almost time for a break.
All right.
Because the family was in San Diego that Sunday afternoon when I got my doctorate, and I looked out in the audience, and there was Pearl, the sister Pearl who you saw earlier, and they had imported her from New Orleans at the time to come and surprise me for my graduation, because I was the only kid of the 12 that got any college education whatsoever, because I suddenly discovered I had a brain and I could think. So, and since then I've been in school, and I'm still in school, and I go to Senior Studies Institute, sponsored by Portland Community College, and I will be 130 and still in school. I love learning. I love learning. So we'll pick up where we left off again.
So we were talking about your education. You mentioned your health. Tell us about your health.
My health now is excellent.
Excellent.
Thanks a lot to somebody in the studio audience out there, my lovely wife, Pat. She watches over me, and chides me if I'm not behaving too good. But thank you, honey. I love you. And I've had a lot of things happen over the years. I'll be 82 in December this year. As I mentioned, appendectomy, a tonsillectomy, and other things happening. And about 14, 15 months ago, I had a major surgery. My small intestine wrapped around itself and died. And thank goodness for the VA, the Veterans Administration. The medical care is just wonderful. And they got me all put back together again, lost about 22, 23 pounds. And it's a 2-year recovery, so I'm about nearly 2/3 in the recovery process, and I'm gaining weight again.
You are.
And doing some strength training. And I still have some difficulties with sticking with a strict diet because of the food allergies and sensitivities that my mother had, and my daughters all inherited from me and their mom. But by and large, I'm pretty healthy and feeling good about things and about life. And I gave up being a depressed kid a long time ago, and now and then I'm a little depressed, but by and large, I appreciate being alive and what it's all about. Yeah. So that's my health.
All right, excellent, good. And you mentioned Pat. So talk about your part.
I got a few slides of that.
Yeah.
There's one there's me with my first wife, Juanita, and my 5 daughters. That's when we lived on 127th Street in Los Angeles, and it was a ritual. Every Easter Sunday, we'd go to Mass and come back home in the backyard and barbecue and make homemade ice cream with a kind of crank around like that. Yeah. And they look forward to it Easter Sunday. So, and then what else do we have here? And there's a picture of somebody out there. Who is that?
Oh, that's Pat.
That's the boo-boo.
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah. And then we have another one of Pat and I in the Caribbean on vacation, having a good time. That was a good time we had there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. And children, grandchildren? You must have a few with 5 daughters.
Yeah. Oh, I lost count a long time ago. And great-grandchildren. Easier for me to say. But here's some pictures of my daughters. About a couple years ago, my wife, Pat, decided to get together with Valerie, my daughter, in this picture, and have me come down to Southern California, and invited all my old friends and extended family, and they had a surprise 80th birthday party for me, which blew me away.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, okay.
So there are my daughters, all 5 of my daughters, and Denise and Daryl and Donna the baby and Brenda and Valerie. And let's see, Okay.
Okay.
And then, do you have any more of my daughters? Yeah, there's some more of my daughters, yeah. That's Brenda and Daryl, who lives in Pennsylvania. And there's Brenda and Valerie. Hi, Valerie. They both live in Southern California. And then there's Donna, the baby of my 5 daughters. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So that's so much for my daughters.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I know you as kind of a political person, so let's talk about that. Are you left, right, center, don't care?
I have a cameraman been working with me for 10 years, and he's been working on me to change over, and I think I've become a Tea Party member. Okay, Rick? I'm a progressive liberal leftist from way back, and Jim Hightower is one of my heroes, and Noam Chomsky, and Martin Luther King, and Gandhi, and FDR, and Bobby Kennedy. Yeah, so I'm a committed leftist progressive.
Okay, why do you think that is?
Interesting. I probably why I became a clinical psychologist too, because I wanted to rescue people from their conditions that they're unhappy with. And if I can help people in my normal existence, then I can help myself and that part of me that was not satisfied or pleased in those formative years when I didn't get the strokes that I needed. and yet I got a lot of loving and caring too. It's a mixed bag. So that's how, and it feels good to be nice to people.
It is, yes. I agree with that. But don't you think that people on the right can be also?
Yes. Excellent question. Ultimately, I look at my thinking and behavior over a period of time and make a summary judgment overall. And a person who's far enough on the right does the same thing and makes a summary judgment overall about the success of their existence and whether they're living a good life. And living a good life is when I can look back and have had loving, good, enabling relationships with other human beings, and I've been kind to them for the most part. And I've not done any outlandish or horrible things, or not joined the American Nazi Party or the Tea Party like Rick does. So that's why I'm a leftist.
Rick's smiling over there.
Yeah, we fight all the time. So that's my political persuasion.
Okay, all right, great. Tell us about a person in your past that you really liked or admired. Gandhi comes to mind. I guess that endured over the years. My respect for him, and I've seen the movie Gandhi probably 6 times over the years. And I pick him first. I used to say Jesus, but the Jesus that I know is the stories that I learned, but someone quite recently suggested that Jesus was not all he was cracked up to be in his performance, in his everyday living. He was sometimes mean and did things like that. So I'm not saying Jesus anymore, but I feel a bit sad. Maybe it's a hangover from my Catholic days. But even if it's a mythical genius, Jesus, he lived a life that was kind, friendly, and charitable, and he cared for people. And in that sense, I would see myself as a Christian with a small c, not a Christian as defined by the practitioners of the various Christian denominations. And then Martin Luther King is a hero of mine, but for a while I saw him during the 60s revolution as being not militant enough. But on the other hand, Malcolm X was too militant. And then I didn't want to identify with any black organization because I was a Creole. I was something in between, you see. It was just awfully confusing. But those are some, and nowadays Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, who's gone now. Yeah, just passed.
Oh, great, great human beings.
Anyone in South America you like?
Hugo Chavez,
right.
And Che Guevara, and Fidel Castro, and the new Latin American leaders now who are taking their countries back from the American imperialists, those leaders, and I don't know how long the CIA and the U.S. government is going to let them get away with becoming independent and free from the World Bank and the greed heads. But Hugo Chavez is my number here.
Yeah.
We should have a Bolivarian revolution of North America. That will save us from the Democrats and Republicans.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So you want something other than the two-party system that we have now?
That's a misnomer, two-party system. There's the two wings of the same party, the corporate party. If we had a real alternative, then we would have somebody who speaks for ordinary citizens rather than people who think they are speaking for an opposing point of view. But it gets right down to it. The corporations still run things, or still in charge, or still manage our lives indirectly.
It's like Ralph Nader described it as Tweedledee and Tweedledum. That's what our choices are.
Tweedledee or Tweedledum?
Right, yes.
So Ralph Nader. See, you know how to push my buttons. Yay, Ralph Nader.
Well, let's get back to your life.
Okay.
Okay. Tell us about your work life. What have you done?
Oh my gosh.
I know you were in the Army.
Yeah. I started working for $2.50 a week, working 6 days a week.
A week?
A week, yeah.
Wow.
A delivery boy for a grocery store. And I finally got a serious job after I got discharged from the Army and was working in aircraft, bucking rivets for $1.10 an hour, and moved up the ranks, and became eventually in that field became an aircraft mechanic, hydraulic checkout mechanic, and F-86s and F-100s. All the while, people, mostly white leaders, recognized that I had something more going than just a simple grease monkey, and gave me opportunities. There were people giving me opportunities, so I'd take their tests and fight them, and they'd have to give me the rating, you know? There's a whole bunch of stories there. And then finally the B-70 program was cut back in the 70s, and I moved into engineering, and that's when I decided I better go to school and get some sort of recognition. So I took my GED after a whole bunch of courses and who knows what all, changing majors. And then I became a technical writer and traveled around the country going to missile bases, writing operations manuals for missile complexes. Can you imagine that? Power generation and distribution system. And became an electrical contractor because I wanted to study psychology. But when I got my license there, then the bottom fell out of the economy and there was no work there. So I kept going to school, and then when I was going to school at night and working full-time, which is pretty tough, going to San Diego on the weekends to take core courses. And I had my private practice as a marriage, family, and child counselor, plus doing 13, 15 units, plus working 8 hours a day.
Wow.
And my mentor, Dr. Boson, my psychiatrist, who was my leader, my field faculty, told me I had to take a break, otherwise I was going to go bananas. And I took a break off from my PhD program and finally went back and finished it off. And like I was saying, David, I'm still going to school and loving it. There's more for that, but more for that later on.
Yeah.
Tonight's show, the third and last in this series, is subtitled A New Orleans Creole's Awareness of Racial Differences and Experiences, and is a rather chronologically recalled report of instances of my unique experiences of racial differences and discrimination. And now we're going to show you a picture of an extended Creole family now. And this was taken a few years ago. This is my oldest brother's kids and their extended family. If you notice, there's a whole variation of shades and colors and hue and all sorts of things. I just thought you'd get an idea of seeing a picture of a Creole, New Orleans Creole family.
So you left it off at, we were talking about probably when you were in junior high school.
Yeah.
So you were kind of uncomfortable in junior high school.
Yeah. I felt very uncomfortable, and my first sense of sexual feelings occurred in junior high school. A guy named George and I got in a bit of an argument. The next thing you know, he socked me and knocked me out.
Oh.
Bing, and the next thing I know, I vaguely remember crashing to the floor, and then I felt something soft on my cheek. And there's a woman's PT instructor, and she's cradling my head, and she's, "Oh, you're okay." And her perfume and her breast against my cheek. She said, "What is this? Hit me again, somebody." That was my first awareness of sexual feelings. And I fell in love with her, right? It was my first love.
Your first love, right?
What was I, about 14 or 15 years old or something?
Yeah.
But that was a memory, and first, yeah.
And then when we were talking earlier, you talked about skipping a lot of high school. In fact, you didn't graduate, as I recall.
Yeah, because I was just horribly. I sensed there was something wrong with the schools we went to. The junior high school I went to, the building was crumbling, and even in the elementary school, the books we had were handed down, and there weren't enough books to go around to every student, and they were marked up because they were from the white schools. I experienced that as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
But then in junior high, there were 4 buildings in this 4-acre plot or something, and 2 of them, we could use the first and second floor on those buildings but the other floors were condemned. This is what black and Creole people had to put up with.
Yeah.
So then we transferred to Booker T. Washington High School, which I learned later on was more like a trade school. They taught brick masonry and car repair and painting and that kind of stuff. And I didn't know there was something going on here. Why wasn't there stuff that I saw in the movies about kids going to school? I didn't want to learn to be a brick mason. My 4 brothers were all carpenters like Papa. They were all tradespeople. And I'm not going to be that. I'm going to be something different. And my mind worked differently. So I ditched there and didn't go to school there and just finally dropped out and went to work on the milk truck delivering milk, and finally volunteered for the military.
Okay.
To get away from, there was something going on, get away from that.
Yeah. And of course, this was all part of that separate but equal, which we all understand now was separate and very unequal.
What was amazing
Right,
is that I just sensed there was something horribly wrong. I had more to be treated like a regular human being, or like working on the milk truck. Our route was delivering milk to homes, for the most part, and these wealthy homes in the Garden District of New Orleans. And we drove by some of the high schools and the universities where the white kids were going to school. And they were all in their uniforms and so nice and neat and pretty and organized and everything, and nothing like the little black and Creole kids I saw going to school. And I longed to be like that. Longed, yeah. And resented. But still, there was this general resentment. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I sensed there was something crooked here.
Yeah. So you
The Army?
eventually went to the Army, but you tried other ways.
The fun thing about the Army was that I volunteered. I tried first for the Marines because my brother was a Marine, and they didn't want me. And I tried for the Navy, and they didn't want me. And reluctantly, I volunteered for the Army, my last resort, because I had to get out of New Orleans. So at the induction place, they called my name with a group of guys going to this training base, and they were all white. But then there were 3 other guys, and myself made the 4th guy, and 2 of these other guys were Creole, but they were with the guys going to this other training base, which was in South Carolina, which were all the blacks were taking basic training. So I felt uneasy with going with the whites, and so I went to the desk where the master sergeant was. I says, I think there's something wrong. I think I should be going with my friends over here. I didn't know them, but I knew 2 of them were Creole, and 1 guy was black, Yancey Brown. And this sergeant, his face turned beet red. That kind of a mistake, mistaking me for a white person.
Oh, that will never do.
So I went to basic training in Columbia, South Carolina, Fort Jackson, and that was an experience and a half. The first time thrown together for basic training with a group of black, at that time, very poor black people. And I sound like a classist or something, but I was very uncomfortable. And I wasn't, because all my life as a kid was these Creoles who thought they were better than black people. So it was horrible in basic training, and I got through that. And that's enough of that story.
Yeah. So tell us about when you were in the Army itself. Then how did you associate with other people, and what happened on when you weren't on duty in your social life?
Service clubs. The service clubs were still in operation like they were actually in World War II, but I'm a World War II vet because I got in within a certain calendar period when the war was declared officially over, but they still had all the USO shows and the service clubs that they did during World War II, actually. And there's a Golden Dragon Service Club was in Yokohama where all races gathered, and I made white and Hispanic acquaintances as friends rather than the blacks, because they assigned me to a trucking company in Yokohama when I left the replacement depot, first got overseas, And I told them this didn't feel right, so they didn't allow me to take part in that. They moved me over to a medical outfit because I volunteered for the medics. But
was the medical unit, was that black or white, or did they divide that up?
was
They
black.
divided everything up.
Yeah, divided
Right.
everything up. But it seems that the troops who were in medical unit, the blacks who were in medical units or headquarters company had higher IQs, generally speaking. So they figured they couldn't put me in a white outfit because I already changed once. So they sent me to
You were labeled.
I didn't know I had a high IQ. But I was brighter than the average bear, not as smart as you are. But that was quite an experience. And this whole thing about race permeated my whole life in the military. So, and I made friends with whites and Hispanics because it seemed easier and wasn't so scary for me.
Yeah.
And the White Service Club in Yokohama, where all the white troops gathered, I'd go over there sometimes, but anyhow, I
So you
wasn't
had,
happy in the military.
yeah, and you had an encounter with a drunk soldier.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what a pro station is?
No, I have no idea.
Prophylactic station. That's when if you had sexual activity in town, you stopped at a pro station. It was maintained by the medical operations, and there was a prophylactic chemical you used to ward off contracting venereal disease. But then I stopped in to say hello to my friend on duty who was managing this pro station. And then this guy named Walker was taking treatment, and he was talking to his buddy in the next stall about whitey and crackers and just really racist stuff. And my white friend was with me, and I was embarrassed. So I said something like, hey, cool it, I mean, it's... So he didn't forget that. So months later, they caught me down in Chinatown, him and his buddies, and they beat the crap out of me.
Wow.
I had a bloody nose, and there's an instance of racism against me by black truck drivers. Yeah, that's enough of that one.
Yeah. So it was easy to see that you didn't really fit in any world. You didn't fit into the world that the larger society wanted you to put into, and you weren't really able to fit in where you wanted to fit in.
No. That's why I felt so good for 11 days, and I was down in New Orleans again, hanging out with Creoles.
Yeah,
And I'm
right.
embarrassed about being aware of my own prejudice from all directions.
Right.
See, you can tell this is affecting me emotionally. I'm not so gabby anymore, so keep going.
Okay, all right, yeah. But you had some good times. Jazz.
Yeah. Oh, this is my fun days when we were doing some drugs that were only available in Japan, and there was no marijuana. We used to dry out anything we could find that looked like it. Maybe marijuana, and smoked it. Didn't do any good. But there was heroin and other stuff, heavy-duty stuff, that I dabbled with. And Bobby Ayala was an Hispanic guy, and he was from L.A., and we became friends, and we'd get stoned with this heavy-duty drugs and hang out in the music room upstairs, and those are marvelous times. I'm reliving it. Don't do drugs out there.
That's not the message, right?
Days, yeah.
Right, yeah. So you left the Army, you moved to Wilna,
my sister.
Oh, yes, your sister, that's right. Okay, and that was in Los Angeles?
Yeah, when I got out of the Army, I came to L.A. rather than go back to New Orleans because I knew I couldn't go back to New Orleans ever. And Wilna's husband, Jimmy, and he's dead now. Wilna's incidentally 97 years old and living in a home in Los Angeles. But Jimmy said to Wilna, well, this boy's been overseas and he needs to just relax and unwind. So he gave me keys to the second car, and he said, you don't work for 6 months, and here's an allowance, because I'd burned all my money as I got discharged and just blew it. And he treated me better than a brother would, or whatever, and those were some good times. Jimmy was a kind and gentle man.
Uh-huh.
So those are some good
All right,
times. See,
great,
there are some
good.
good
Yes,
times.
they're good times, sure, yeah. And so you got through your 6 months of paid vacation, and you went to work for North American Aviation in L.A.
Yeah, that's when I was working on airplanes and having a good time doing that. But I experienced the workforce was nominally integrated, and I was always looked at as something else. As I've gotten older, the black heritage shows more, but I was even nowadays I look like I'm from the Middle East or Hispanic even sometimes. But I was more easily taken for something else, so to speak, then. So I had mixed feelings of relief in not being treated as Negro, and I felt guilty at passing by default. So I was scheduled to be promoted to hydraulic checkout mechanic. That was extremely difficult because they didn't want to see me promoted because of my race. But my boss decided, he was a white man, he decided we would take on anything that the company threw at me, and they would arrange for me to be tested and get this promotion. So it was a 4-hour oral examination by this big wig, and I made 99.60-something% on I studied. And this, Charlie Zell said, no matter what it takes, you don't work on the line, you go into my office and study and study and study, and we'll beat these so-and-sos. And we did.
All right.
So there's an instance of anger. Now, in that same group, I have a note here saying Longshore and Liza and Rastus. So I was with the crew working on aircraft, and Longshore was the lead man's name. This is before I became a checkout mechanic. And Longshore liked to tell Liza and Rastus jokes. You know what those are?
Nope.
Racist jokes that the old Southern white boys tell to each other. Liza is the negress. And Rastus is the boss guy.
Oh, okay.
And it's just horrible, those jokes. But Longshore would tell these jokes at break time, and most of the members of the crew would just laugh, and I just kind of laugh a little bit. But there was one white guy who knew that I wasn't white, and he was so damned uncomfortable because I wouldn't say anything. And finally one day I said to Longshore, when he and I were alone, I says, do you know who I am and what I am? And he was so apologetic. He was so sorrowful. He's living a life of racism and don't even know he's talking to one.
Yeah, right. Right.
But there's an example of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I had just. Well, never mind. We're not talking about me, so that's fine.
Oh, one more about that story.
Yeah.
Evidence of racism. One Monday morning, I came to work. We were working in the hangar then, and my whole department had shipped out. They had managed to keep a secret from me for weeks. They had prepared to move the entire department to France to modify a bunch of aircraft at an Air Force base, but they didn't want to take me because I was the only black, and they didn't want me to go with them for a number of reasons. And the hangar was empty. So I went to the hangar next door, and the supervisor was waiting. He says, come on. He says, I'll put you into my department. And I worked like a dog, but talk about being crushed.
Oh, yeah.
The racism. Another time they called me in to be given a field service assignment because I was so bright and I knew so much about the airplane, to be a field service representative for the company and go to the Air Force bases around the world and teach the Air Force people about the airplane. But then when I got into this interview, they looked at me and they made a mistake, because on the time card there's a -05, 04, and 03, and -05 meant Negro, but they didn't notice that. Based on my record, my score on the hydraulic checkout examination, I was really bright.
And no black person could be so.
That's right. They made a mistake, so they danced and tried everything in the world to back out of this, and finally they says, you understand. Well, I left work and I got drunk. That hurt.
Yeah.
So there's another instance of racism.
Well, and this would be in the early 50s?
This was probably in the late 50s.
Late 50s, well.
Yeah. Then I was assigned to. Oh, I got to go back and tell you about. I went to New Orleans, and I had a '49 Ford, and I had my 5 daughters in the car, and my wife Juanita, my first wife, and we were driving back from New Orleans to Los Angeles. This must have been in the early '60s, and it was hot as heck, and we had an evaporative cooler hanging on the window, and we ran out of water, so we pulled into a gas station in a remote part of Texas, and I got out and had my water bottle, so I went up. It was deserted, nobody was there but just the attendant, and I asked him, can I get some water? And there was a cooler where the water was refrigerated, and then there was a little plastic hose where you put it in there, and then you could fill your bottle with it. So I asked him if I could get some water, and he says, yeah. So as I started filling my bottle, he came out and he grabbed the plastic tube and snatched it. He says, you don't need no water. And I'm looking back, and there's my babies in the car thirsty. They're roasting, and this. But then when he snatched the hose from me, he then went into the office of the gas station. But then there's a back room in the gas station, and I followed him. And I couldn't find him, and nobody else around. So he must have been in the back room, and I smelled it. I knew he was waiting for me to go into that front room and go to the back room to find him, and he was going to blast me away.
Really? Oh, wow.
So I backed out. I experienced this. Turned, and my kids are looking, what's going on, Daddy? And I said, oh, nothing. And I quietly got back in the car and drove away.
Wow.
There's an experience of racism.
Wow. That's...
And nowadays I calibrate myself and see if at some point I'm behaving in a racist fashion or acting out some of this crap I learned early on, because racism comes from all directions, and practically everyone has some degree of racism, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, yeah.
So, don't
wow,
ask me
that's a powerful statement. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So, those are some examples of my experiences of racism and discrimination and my own racist beliefs and tendencies. And I'm still working on becoming the kind of a person that I think Jesus was, and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and being a loving human being.
And that's the way I experience you always.
You think so?
I do. Yes. I do.
So it looks like it's time for us to stop. KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you, Doug, and you, Jimmy, and you, Ted, and you, Steve.